Hey, y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle housing market watch for March 18th, 2025. Well, we're halfway through March right now, almost to spring here in Seattle. We've been working on the spring market already. It's been an earlier spring, and we are seeing lots and lots of houses coming on the market. Still not enough, though, to keep up with all the buyers. So in a lot of cases, especially around the median price, we're seeing multiple offers in a lot of scenarios. It does not mean everybody's getting multiple offers, right? There are plenty of houses, especially if you're in the higher price points, that are not selling as quickly or getting multiple offers. Condos are the same thing. In most cases, condos are taking quite a bit longer to sell than the single family houses. Now, if we look back at the past week versus this week, a lot of the data is very similar when it comes to houses coming on the market and sales. We saw this week 621 houses come on the market, new listings, right? Last week, 623. So pretty much the same number there. A few less price reductions this week, 218 versus 283 last week. Again, that's still a lot of price reductions. If you're seeing those numbers, let's just say that's about a third, right, of the houses that are listed are seeing price reductions at some point. And as we're looking at the pending sales, 813 this past week versus 854, slightly down, but sold 486 versus 459. So again, just not that much different when you're looking at the numbers week over week. And when we get to our newer data that we've been incorporating, those week snapshots of the market in King and Snohomish County, getting a little bit of a different look more recently, you'll see that some of the data is also very similar, but we're actually seeing an uptick in the competition in both King and Snohomish counties, again, on average, at those median price points for the most part. So mortgage rates, nothing's happening here to change anything or heat up the market or slow it down at this point. We're seeing 6.81 was the Mortgage News Daily average rate here today on their website. And last week, 6.79. So 0.02% difference. Nothing that's going to move the needle, right, towards more buyers being excited or making offers or getting out of the market or pausing, right? We're not seeing, I would say at this point, the mortgage rates affecting the housing market in either direction. Now, they are higher generally, so we have that effect, but we're not seeing any new changes at this point to the housing market because of mortgage rates. I will say over the past week and a half, the stock market has been selling off like crazy. I think there is some anecdotal effect there, potentially some effect that people might not be as interested in jumping into the market, maybe at those higher price points. There's no real way for me to prove that outside of just my gut feel and opinion, but I would think there is some type of psychological effect, at least as the market's been dropping. It can change just as quickly, right? That's how the stock market is. The stock market responds very quickly, generally speaking, and the housing market is a lot slower to respond. But one way we can see those responses is potentially just some people saying, oh, let's take a week off. Let's kind of see what happens. Or, maybe we did like that house, but if we sell some of our stock right now, it's not going to be worth as much. And so just kind of taking a little bit of a tactical pause. Again, there's no way for me to prove that. The King County data and the Snohomish County data here is interesting as we're heading towards the end of the month, and we're seeing the amount of multiple offers ticking up. So as we're heading towards the spring here, a couple days away, we're seeing in King County that we had 41% of sales including multiple offers or having multiple offers. And that is up from 37% last week. And this also reflects in some of these other things we've been talking about. It looks like out of all the tools in the multiple offer tool belt, it looks like the inspection was the one that people left off the most often. It looks like 32% of offers included one of those versus last week, 36. So you're seeing a 4% jump in the pendings with multiple offers, and we saw a 4% decrease in the houses that had the inspection addendums included in the winning offer. Now, the pendings with financing addendums exactly the same at 59%, and also with escalations at 19%. So it seems like that was that lever. Again, there's not any way to say exactly that was the reason, but in my experience, the more competitive the market, the more often that offers have fewer contingencies, and the inspection contingency is the one that people tend to leave off. Interestingly, I talked about this a lot last week, so I won't too much this week, but the inspection addendum is the one that can hurt you forever. And the financing addendum is one of those where it protects you during the process, but afterwards it's gone. It doesn't cost you any money. In theory, as long as you qualify for financing, you are able to proceed, and it doesn't cost you anything extra to have that removed. The cost is potentially your earnest money if for some reason you can't move forward with the purchase. And again, that's a risk that a lot of people don't want to take, obviously. The inspection addendum, though, is interesting because that's one of those that if you're moving forward and let's say you don't have an inspection, you are putting yourself at a lot of risk for not knowing what's going on. Hopefully it's good. Hopefully it works out, but you could have some hidden costs associated with the house afterwards. It could cost you far more than any earnest money deposit, and you can't get out of it. You own the house. It's your house, right? Now, in a lot of cases, buyers are having a pre-inspection themselves, so they could have moved forward in that regard. The seller could have provided them a pre-inspection. So this doesn't mean buyers said, oh, I don't need an inspection at all, but they might have had some type of inspection report to rely on. At the same time, though, it just makes me think, interesting that this is the one people tend to remove versus the financing contingency. As we're looking at the median sales price, quite a bit lower last week, and this all gets kind of put together in the monthly data. $935 was the median sales price last week in King County. In King County, the previous week, it was over $1 million, right? So that just means some higher price houses, right? More higher price houses sold the previous week than this past week. And if we're looking at the amount over asking price, last week houses on average sold for asking price. This week, 1% over the asking price, which makes more sense as we saw more multiple offer scenarios. It makes sense that we would see a higher amount over the asking price on average. And again, that means that some sold for above, some sold for below. Let's transition over to Snohomish County real quick. And let's see what was happening in Snohomish County. Pretty much the same median sales price in Snohomish County week over week. $818,275 in Snohomish County last week, $820,000 the previous week. Pretty much the same number. And as we're looking at the amount over asking price, both weeks, 1% over the asking price in Snohomish County last week and this week. And at the same time, we saw an uptick in the pendings with multiple offers. So in both counties, we're seeing more buyers offering on the same houses. So 42% of houses in Snohomish County last week had multiple offers. The week before, 35% of houses had multiple offers. And again, we see that difference reflected in pendings with inspection addendum versus pendings without an inspection addendum. So we see 35% of sales last week had an inspection addendum in Snohomish County. This week, only 28%. And interestingly, as we saw 7% more multiple offer scenarios, we saw 7% fewer inspection addendums included in a contract. And if you're a buyer and you're listening to this, this is some really good intel. And what this means for you is there has to be a way around, even though I said earlier, you don't want to get rid of this, there has to be a way that you can still get an inspection, whether that's your own pre-inspection before making an offer, or you're maybe relying on that seller inspection. There has to be a way here in these scenarios where you're able to move forward without this contingency, is what this data is saying, right? And so I think my favorite is that pre-offer inspection where you have your own inspection prior to making an offer. I think sometimes you can rely on the seller's report. It's really hard to tell. And it's one of those risks that you take when you rely on an inspection provided by somebody else. I think in some cases you can do that, but it is a case by case basis. I think there are ways to include that inspection addendum in the contract depending on the scenario. Right? Sometimes you can have a inspection that's pass or fail, or you can make some type of guarantees to the seller. But at the same time, if you got to choose between an offer, if you're the seller that has an inspection, even if it's dressed up really nicely, it's quick, it's giving some type of guarantees. At the same time, if the buyer has a chance to back out, the seller's probably going to take an offer if it's the same price and other things that doesn't have an inspection contingency. So that's why we're seeing this in the numbers. And then we're looking at pendings with the financing addendum. As we see here, the escalation and financing addendums are going to be about the same in these scenarios. It's the inspection that's changing the most with more multiple offers. So we still saw 66% of buyers including financing addendums in Snohomish County versus 70% last week. So there is a change, right? A few more people got more risky with their financing situation, but at the same time, it's not exactly the same. So only some people did that, whereas it looks like everybody did the other one. And the pending sales with escalation addendums, 14% versus 13%. Not really a big difference there, but clearly buyers are experiencing more competition in Snohomish County as well. So what does this mean for a buyer? I think it means that we're in that spring market. We're probably going to see this continue on for a little bit. For buyers, this means that it is harder to buy a house right now. Houses are selling quicker. Sellers are getting lots of offers. Sometimes lots of offers are right away, even though they said, hey, we're going to wait. You know, I've experienced a few times in the past few weeks with buyers that are kind of in the median sales price range where it's way more competitive than, let's say, I have a condo listing, right? It's a great condo in Queen Anne. There's just not a lot of people even wanting to come look at it. And it has to do with the amount of buyers in that market for what is being sold, right? There's less buyers trying to buy that condo. And there are tons of buyers trying to buy a median priced house in Snohomish County and King County right now. I also have a great listing in Meadowdale right now, but it's on the higher side of the price range in that community. It's well above the median sales price. And again, it's not selling quite as quickly as some of these houses in the median price range. So the takeaway for sellers is, if you have a house that's within this median sales price range, I think you can expect quite a bit of competition. There's a lot of first-time home buyers in the market right now. I think if you're a buyer, again, you're going to be up against some pretty stiff competition if you're finding yourself in that median sales price range that we were just talking about, looking for a home. If you have some questions about the market, your situation in particular, I'm happy to be a sounding board for you. And of course, if there's any way I can bring value to your home buying or selling process, I'd love to connect.